You know how it is, you're at the market, maybe, or you're just trying to figure out the budget for the month, and you can't help but wonder, like, what is the government's big plan for rising costs for jobs?
It feels a bit like trying to follow a recipe when the ingredient prices keep shifting, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Well, that feeling, that uncertainty, that's really what this 2025 budget policy statement is trying to get a handle on for Kenyans.
Okay.
Think of it like the government laying out its recipe book, showing us what they intend to cook up for the economy, this coming year, and looking ahead a bit.
So it lays out the main ingredients, their strategies, their priorities for those everyday concerns.
Precisely. It outlines their plan. We've been looking through excerpts from this PDF, the 2025 Budget Policy Statement.
Right. So what's the headline then?
Right.
For, the average person trying to understand this, what's the core message?
Well, the central theme, really, is building on what they call the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. You'll hear it called BETA.
Beta. Okay, I heard that before.
Yeah. This is the third BPS under the current administration, so it's not like a totally new recipe, more like refining what they've already started.
And the main aim of Beta, what does it boil down to?
It boils down to 6 key goals, essentially. 6 main things they're shooting for.
6 goals. All right, give us the quick version, the highlights.
Okay, so number 1, bring down the cost of living. Number 2, eradicate hunger. 3, create jobs. 4, expand the tax base, get more people contributing. 5, improve our foreign exchange balances. And 6, foster inclusive growth. Make sure it benefits everyone.
Okay, those are some big ambitions. Cost of living, jobs, growth for all. And how are they planning to achieve that? What's their core method?
They're really putting a lot of emphasis on what they call a value chain approach.
Value chain. Explain that a bit.
Sure. So imagine a farmer growing, say, maize. This approach isn't just about growing the maize.
Right.
It's about everything that happens after it leaves the farm gate, how it's processed, how it gets to market, how value is added along the way.
So the whole journey.
Exactly. The idea is that by strengthening each link in that chain production, adding value, market access, they can attract investment and, well, ultimately hit those 6 big goals we just mentioned.
Got it. Focusing on the whole process, not just one part. Now, what about the current situation? When the government looks at the economy now, according to this BPS, what do they see?
Globally, they're seeing a somewhat steady picture. They project global growth around 3.2, maybe 3.3% for this year and next.
Okay.
They mentioned some recovery in places like China, Europe, the UK, but maybe a bit of a slowdown in the US and Japan.
And here at home. What's their assessment of the Kenyan economy?
Domestically, the BPS paints a picture of resilience. That's the word they use, saying the economy's held up reasonably well despite, the challenges we've all felt.
Resilience.
Right.
Oh, okay. Do they say why?
They believe the specific efforts under BETA, their reforms, have played a part in stabilizing things. And looking ahead, they're actually forecasting growth of 5.3% in 2025.
Wow, 5.3%.
Yeah, and they expect that momentum to continue in the medium term.
That sounds like quite a jump. What's driving that optimism? Where's that growth supposed to come from?
They're pointing to a few key things. Better performance in agriculture, a strong services sector, and importantly, the continued rollout and, the impact of this bottom-up agenda. BETA.
It's interesting to hear that number, 5.3%, because I'm thinking if you're listening to this, maybe struggling with bills, maybe looking for work, you might be wondering if that projected growth will actually, trickle down, feel real in your daily life. Does the BPS acknowledge that potential gap between the big number and the reality on the ground?
That's a really crucial point. And yes, while the BPS talks about future growth, it does provide some context about the present. It doesn't just paint a rosy picture.
Like what?
Well, for example, it mentions that inflation, remember how high it was? It peaked at 9.6% in late 2022.
Yeah, definitely felt that.
Well, the BPS notes it came down, but was still at 3% at the end of 2024. And it also mentions that private sector credit growth, how much businesses are borrowing, has slowed down. So, while the overall direction they're pointing to is positive growth ahead, the document itself contains figures that suggest, many Kenyans are likely still feeling the pinch from recent economic pressures. It's not suggesting everything is perfect right now.
Okay, that makes sense. So these big goals, this hopeful outlook.
Yeah.
But how are they planning to pay for it all? What does the BPS say about the government's finances?
A major focus is on something called fiscal consolidation.
Fiscal consolidation. Sounds technical.
It does, but think of it like the government trying to tighten its own belt.
Okay.
The aim is to reduce the amount of public debt, the money the country owes, while still making sure there's enough cash for essential services, schools, hospitals, security.
Right, balancing act. So how do they plan to do that? Less debt, but still spending on essentials.
Their strategy seems to have a few main pillars. First, improve revenue mobilization.
Which means?
Basically, finding ways to collect more of the taxes and other income that's owed to the government, making collection more efficient.
Okay, collect more. What else?
Second, they're focusing on accountability and transparency, making sure public money is managed better, tracked properly.
That sounds good.
And third, they're working on making the tax system itself more efficient and fairer. They have this thing called the medium-term revenue strategy guiding that.
So, potentially more taxes coming in, but hopefully collected better and used more wisely. Are there other ways the government gets money besides taxes?
Yes, absolutely. The BPS talks about non-tax revenues. These are things like fees and charges that government agencies collect for providing services, like passport fees, permits, that kind of thing.
Right.
And interestingly, they're also trying to get a much clearer picture of everything the government actually owns, buildings, land, equipment, using their financial management system, IFMIS.
Why do that?
The idea is to identify assets that are just sitting there, idle, maybe not being used properly, and then figure out if they can be sold off or put to better use to generate value.
Makes sense. Don't let things go to waste. What about getting help from outside the government? Private companies?
Yeah, that's where public-private partnerships, or PPPs, come in. The plan is to scale these up.
PPPs. How do those work again?
It's where a private company might, say, fund and build a major road or a power plant. Then they operate it for a set period, and the government shares in the benefits or pays fees over time. It's a way to get big projects done without the government having to foot the entire bill up front.
Okay, so that covers the money side, collecting more, spending carefully, using assets better, bringing in partners. Now let's dig into how these plans are supposed to actually, impact people's daily lives. The BPS highlights key sectors like agriculture, housing, healthcare. Let's start with agriculture. It's so vital for so many Kenyans.
It really is. Agriculture is presented as a cornerstone of this whole BETA plan, and the BPS sets out some pretty specific ambitions there.
Like what? Give us an example.
Well, one big target is to boost the earnings of smallholder farmers. They want to increase average earnings from around $300,000 per acre now up to $500,000 per acre annually by 2027.
Wow, $300K to $500K per acre. That's a huge jump. If you're a small farmer listening, that sounds almost too good to be true.
It's definitely ambitious, and the BPS outlines several specific things they believe will help achieve that.
Okay, what sort of things? What might a farmer actually see changing on the ground?
We'll take the dairy sector. The BPS says $3 billion was released to modernize new KCC. The focus there is on paying farmers on time and keeping the farm gate price at $50 per liter.
50 shillings a liter, paid on time. That would make a difference.
Exactly. And the document notes that milk intake at KCC has already gone up. So if you're a dairy farmer, the idea is you might already be seeing, or should soon see, more consistent payments and a better price. That's the direct link they're drawing.
Okay, that's dairy. What about other crops? Like tea and coffee? Major exports for us.
Yeah, for tea and coffee, the emphasis is shifting more towards value addition here in Kenya, not just exporting raw beans or leaves.
Right, processing it locally.
Precisely. Increasing what the smallholder farmers earn from that processed product and growing the overall export value. The BPS actually highlights some numbers here.
Oh, yeah.
It says in the last financial year, FY 2023-24, Kenya exported 48,000 metric tons of tea and coffee, which brought in $25 billion for farmers.
$25 billion.
And they also mentioned that average prices at the Nairobi Coffee Exchange went up by 25%. Plus, apparently, some smallholder tea farmers have already started exporting value-added processed tea directly to places like West Africa and China since late 2022.
Huh, interesting. So the idea is a tea or coffee farmer might see more opportunities locally to process their crop, maybe get a better price, tap into new markets.
That seems to be the goal, yes. Moving up the value chain, as they say.
Feels like a consistent theme. Don't just export the raw stuff. What other support is there for farmers? Fertilizer is always a big one.
Absolutely. Fertilizer subsidies and distribution are mentioned prominently. The BPS states that in the current financial year, let me find the number. Over 1 million metric tons. Yeah, 1,060,285.65 metric tons of subsidized fertilizer were distributed,
Wow, that's a lot of fertilizer.
reaching over 1.4 million farmers, according to the document.
No.
There's also a specific budget mention, K-414 million for a national edibles oils promotion project, maybe supporting sunflower or canola farmers.
Could be. And what about helping farmers with things like loans or getting their produce to buyers?
Yeah, they talk about promoting agripreneurs. These are meant to be individuals or small businesses that assist farmers with accessing finance, getting loans, and finding markets for their produce.
Agripreneurs. Okay.
And they mentioned that a database of farmers and these agripreneurs is being integrated, presumably to connect them better.
Right. And livestock. Anything specific for pastoralists or livestock farmers?
Yes, there are policies mentioned focusing on disease control, which is huge for livestock. Also, value addition, think meat processing, leather, and improving market access.
Are there targets?
Yeah, some big ones again. They're targeting the creation of 500,000 jobs in the livestock sector and aiming for an average monthly income of K-6,000 per cow. How they calculate that, I'm not sure, but it's in there.
Interesting.
They even mentioned specific projects like a camel milk processing factory being established and milk cooling centers. So if you're a livestock farmer, maybe in the ASL regions, the hope is better vet services, processing facilities, and market links.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. Housing and settlement. We know our towns and cities are growing incredibly fast. That puts a strain on housing, doesn't it?
A massive strain. The BPS acknowledges this directly. It states that rapid urbanization is a significant challenge and estimates over 10 million Kenyans are living in informal settlements or slums.
10 million. That's a staggering number.
Yeah.
So what's the government's response, according to this statement?
They point to ongoing efforts, expanding programs like the Kenya Urban Settlement Program Phase 2 and the Kenya Informal Settlement Improvement Project Phase 2.
And what do those programs actually do?
They focus on really crucial issues in these areas, things like securing land tenure, giving people legal rights to the land they live on, and upgrading basic infrastructure, roads, water, sanitation.
So improving living conditions and security for people already in these settlements.
That's the aim. The BPS also reports on the number of actual housing units delivered recently.
Oh, yeah. How many?
It says 1,041 social housing units, 2,133 affordable units, and 1,714 affordable middle-class units have been completed. That's across 24 counties, so just over 4,800 units in total across those categories.
4,800 units delivered. But you just said over 10 million people live in informal settlements. That number seems, well, small in comparison.
It does highlight the scale of the challenge, doesn't it? The BPS presents these completed units as progress, tangible results, but it also frames these programs KSIP2 as ongoing long-term initiatives.
So it's not a quick fix.
Not at all. The BPS suggests the focus is on building the foundation, sort of systematically addressing the challenges over time, laying the groundwork for more sustainable, larger-scale improvements down the line. They also mention integrating refugee camps into host communities as part of this broader settlement strategy.
Okay, let's move to another really critical area, healthcare. There's been a big shift recently, moving from the old NHIF system to the new Social Health Authority and Taifa Care. What does the BPS tell us about that transition?
Right, that's a huge change. The BPS presents this shift to Taifa Care under the Social Health Authority as a fundamental step towards universal health coverage, or UHC.
What's the key difference they highlight compared to NHIF?
A major point they emphasize is broader coverage. Taifa Care aims to cover all Kenyans, including those in the informal sector or unemployed, not just those in formal jobs or who could afford the old NHIF contributions.
So truly universal.
That's the goal. They also stress that Taifa Care has worked on accurately costing healthcare services, trying to avoid the kind of debt issues NHIF ran into, and, importantly, they've removed the waiting period. You should be able to access services once enrolled.
No waiting period. That's significant. How's the rollout going, according to the BPS?
According to the document, over 15 million Kenyans have enrolled in Taifa Care already, and it says about 60% of employers have transitioned their employees over from NHIF.
15 million enrolled.
Okay.
So for you listening, the idea is this could mean easier access to healthcare without that upfront worry about payment or having to wait months after registering.
That seems to be the intended benefit, yes. A potentially significant shift, especially for those previously outside the NHIF net.
And looking forward. What are the future plans for healthcare in the BPS?
The focus now seems to be on strengthening the whole system, making UHC a reality across the board. This includes things like developing our own local capacity to produce medicines and medical supplies, biomedical and pharmaceutical industries.
To rely less on imports.
Exactly. Reduce reliance on imports, maybe bring down costs. They also want to improve the supply chain for medicines through KEMSA, mentioning regional distribution centers in Kisumu, Embakasi, and Mombasa.
Okay.
And, of course, continuing to implement the different funds under the new structure, the Primary Healthcare Fund, the Main Social Health Insurance Fund, SHIF, and the Fund for Emergencies, Chronic, and Critical Illnesses.
Got it. Now, another area that gets a lot of attention is the digital space, the digital superhighway, and the creative economy. How does the government see these fitting into the bigger picture for Kenyans?
The aim here is really multifaceted. Drive investment in tech, expand the reach of fiber optic cables to get broadband internet to more places, and digitize government processes, make services easier to access online.
What progress do they report?
The BPS mentions specific numbers: 13,712 kilometers of fiber optic cable laid so far, and the number of public Wi-Fi hotspots has increased to 12,262.
Public Wi-Fi, those actually useful.
Well, the idea is to provide access points, especially in underserved areas. Alongside this, they mention the plan to establish 1,450 ICT hubs by the end of 2024.
ICT hubs, what are those for?
They're envisioned as centers for digital skills training, supporting local content creation, think YouTubers, app developers, and also acting as access points for those digitized government services, like digital Huduma centers, perhaps.
Okay. And the long-term vision?
Ambitious again. The target is a massive 100,000 kilometers of national fiber optic connectivity eventually.
100,000 kilometers. So for someone maybe looking for digital skills or trying to start an online business or just tired of queuing for government services, this digital push could open doors.
That's definitely the potential they're outlining. More connectivity, more skills, more services online, streamlining things and creating new opportunities in the digital economy.
It feels like all these plans, agriculture, housing, digital, they all depend on having solid foundations, right? Like good roads, reliable power, water. What does the BPS say about these core enablers? Infrastructure.
You're absolutely right. Infrastructure is presented as critical, the bedrock for everything else. The BPS goes into quite a bit of detail here.
Such as?
Plans for constructing and rehabilitating roads with specific kilometer targets set for the next financial year and the medium term. Building new bridges, 62 are planned. Upgrading rural access roads to improve connectivity for farmers.
And beyond roads.
Ongoing railway projects are mentioned. Development at the ports Mombasa, Lamu, upgrades to airports. It covers the whole transport network.
What about energy? Always a concern.
Big focus there too, expanding the power transmission grid to reduce losses and connect more areas. And a significant push on renewable energy.
Renewables like?
Solar power, both large-scale and smaller standalone systems. Small hydro projects, wind masts, even biogas plants. And they specifically mention e-mobility initiatives.
E-mobility, electric vehicles.
Yes, like the locally assembled electric buses that were launched by Bosigo and KVM back in April 2024, a move towards cleaner public transport.
Interesting. And water. Crucial for agriculture and homes.
Water infrastructure is definitely a priority in the statement. Building dams for storage and power, expanding irrigation schemes, they mention acres developed, the Thaiba Dam benefiting the Mwea expansion, for example, and also mapping groundwater resources, which is vital, especially with climate change concerns.
So the message is they're investing heavily in the basics. Better transport, more reliable and greener energy, more secure water access.
That's the picture painted in the BPS, yes. That these infrastructure improvements are essential to unlock the potential in all the other sectors we've talked about. For the average Kenyan, this could translate to, shorter travel times, fewer power outages, better water supply for farming or household use.
Okay. The BPS also talks about boosting the manufacturing sector. What are the key areas they're focusing on there? It feels linked to that value addition idea.
It absolutely is. A lot of it connects back to agriculture. Agro-processing is a big one, trying to reduce those post-harvest losses by, for instance, establishing 200 fresh produce aggregation and market centers.
So helping farmers sell more of what they grow.
And process it. Then there's the leather industry, encouraging local demand for Kenyan leather goods, promoting exports. Building and construction materials are mentioned too, maybe linking to the housing agenda. They mention levies on imported clinker and steel billets, perhaps to support local production.
Protecting local industries.
Seems like part of the strategy. Textiles and apparels are another focus plans for textile value addition centers, modern cotton ginneries, industrial warehouses, supporting the whole chain from cotton farmer to finished garment.
What else in manufacturing?
Edible oils and crop oils, promoting cottage industries, helping them get processing machinery. And again, tea and coffee support for cooperatives, processing equipment, developing specialty products, and dairy, including modernizing new PCC and that camel milk processing we mentioned earlier.
So a real push across different manufacturing areas, often linked back to local resources like agriculture.
Exactly. The underlying idea seems to be create more jobs here, produce more goods locally, add value before exporting, and maybe even make some things cheaper for consumers if we're making them ourselves.
We've covered a lot of ground: agriculture, housing, health, digital infrastructure, manufacturing. If you had to sort of boil it all down, what are the absolute key things for someone listening to take away from this 2025 budget policy statement?
Okay, boiling it down. I'd say first, this document is the government's roadmap, its statement of intent for the next few years. It's all centered around that bottom-up economic transformation agenda, BETA.
Right, BETA is key.
Second, the core message is about trying to build a more inclusive, more prosperous Kenya. They plan to do this by really focusing on strengthening key sectors like agriculture, investing heavily in that foundational infrastructure: roads, power, water, digital. Third, it's about expanding access to essentials like healthcare through Taifei Care, creating digital opportunities, and boosting local manufacturing to create jobs and add value.
Okay, so roadmap, BETA focus, key sector investments, expanded access.
Exactly. But fourth, and this is important, while the BPS presents a generally optimistic outlook, projecting that 5.3% growth, it's also crucial for you, the listener, to remember that the document itself contains data acknowledging the economic pressures people are still feeling now, like that inflation figure, even though it's down. And many of these initiatives, like the housing or major infrastructure, are long-term plays.
So it's not promising overnight miracles.
Definitely not. It's presenting a plan, an ambitious roadmap with some big destinations, but the journey to get there involves navigating very real existing challenges. It's a plan, not a guarantee.
That's a really helpful summary. It definitely gives you a lot to think about, a framework for understanding what the government says it's trying to do. So as you hear about these plans, these goals for agriculture, for housing, for your health services, it really prompts the question, doesn't it? What kind of changes might you actually see starting to happen in your own community? And perhaps more importantly, what role do you think these plans will ultimately play in shaping Kenya's future?